The ranch was
Oh
dying,
my
just like everything
God.
else in that empty corner of the desert. Old Tom watched the dust blow across the empty corrals and knew what was coming. He had seen it happen to other ranches before the slow death, the kind that took years but felt like forever. The Double Circle Ranch had once been something important. 20 years ago, horses ran strong here, and men laughed in the evenings. Now there was only silence and broken fences and the wind that carried sand into everything. Tom was 63 years old, and his hands shook when he held the rope. His back bent like an old tree, and his knees hurt when he walked. He was still the ranch manager, but there was very little to manage anymore. The owner, Mr. Garrett, had moved to the city 2 years ago to be with his sick daughter. He came back once, looked at everything that had fallen apart, and left again without saying much. Now Tom ran the ranch with only 2 young hands to help him, boys really, not even men yet, and they were already planning to leave for the big towns where there was real work. The morning the Mare came, Tom did not know that everything would change. She appeared at the gate just as the sun was rising, covered in dust and blood. Her dark coat was matted and ugly. She had been running for days, Tom could tell. Her hooves were cracked, and her eyes showed the kind of fear that comes from real danger. She was beautiful once, probably, but now she looked broken, hurt, lost. Tom opened the gate carefully. The Mare walked through like she was dreaming, like her body was moving, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She went straight to the water trough and drank until Tom thought she might get sick. He watched and said nothing. There was something about this horse that made him want to be quiet, to be gentle, to understand without asking questions. By evening, the Mare lay down in the clean hay Tom put in the barn. She was breathing hard, like her lungs were tired from running so far. Tom brought her food, but she would not eat. He stayed with her through the night, sitting on a wooden box in the corner, just watching. Sometimes a horse needs someone to be present. Sometimes that is enough. The second day came, and the Mare was very sick. Tom knew what to do. He had helped horses through sickness before, though it had been many years. He brought warm water mixed with salt. He brought blankets because the desert night was cold. He talked to her in a quiet voice, telling her stories about other horses he had known, other animals that got sick but got better. He told her his name, even though she was a horse and could not understand words the way people do. But sometimes horses understand other things, the tone of a voice, the intention of a touch, the feeling that someone cares whether you live or die. On the third day, the Mare gave birth. Tom was there in the moment it happened, and what he saw broke his heart into pieces that he was not sure could fit back together again. The colt was very, very small. Too small. His legs bent in wrong ways, like he was broken before he was even born. His body was so thin that Tom could count every rib. His coat was patchy and ugly, and when he tried to stand, he could barely hold his own weight. Tom had seen many horses born over his long life. He knew what healthy looked like, and this was not healthy. This was a colt that was born already halfway to dying. The Mare looked at her baby with an expression that only a mother can make, full of love and sadness and hope, all mixed together at the same time. She tried to help him stand, but he was too weak. She lay down beside him, and he found his way to her for milk, though even this seemed to drain all his strength. Tom sat down hard on the floor of the barn. He felt very old suddenly, older than his 63 years. He knew what most people would say. They would say this colt would not survive. They would say it was better to let nature take its course, to not waste food and water on an animal that was already finished before he even started. Tom had heard people say these things before, and he had even believed them sometimes. But something was different this time. Maybe it was because the ranch was so empty now, so quiet and lonely. Maybe it was because Tom himself felt broken and useless, like he did not belong anywhere anymore. Maybe it was because he looked at that tiny colt struggling to breathe and saw something that refused to give up, even though the whole world had already written his story before it even began. Tom made a decision that night. He would stay with this colt. He would care for him. He would try to keep him alive, even though everyone would say it was impossible. Even though Tom himself was not sure he still had the strength for such a thing. Even though failure seemed like the only possible ending. The next morning, the other two ranch hands came to look at the newborn. They looked at the bent legs, the thin body, the obvious weakness, and they shook their heads. "That one won't see spring," one of them said. Tom said nothing. He just kept caring for the Mare and her impossible baby, moving quietly through the barn as the days began to grow warmer and the desert started to wake up again. He did not try to convince anyone that the colt could live. He did not argue or explain. He simply showed up every single morning before dawn and every single evening after sunset, and he worked. Nobody understood why. But in that empty, dying ranch in the middle of nowhere, something quiet and powerful was beginning a story about love, about refusing to give up, about the magic that happens when someone believes in you, when even you do not believe in yourself.
The rain came in the middle of April, and with it came a stranger. Tom was in the barn, as he always was, sitting beside the colt and watching him breathe. The tiny horse, who Tom had started calling Scout, though the name did not quite fit, was doing better than expected. His legs were still bent in strange ways, but he was standing now for a few minutes at a time. He was eating a little more. The light in his eyes was getting stronger instead of dimmer. It was slow progress, the kind that most people would never notice, but Tom saw it and felt grateful in a way that surprised him. The rain was heavy and cold, the kind of rain that made a person want to stay inside and forget the world existed. Tom heard the hoofbeats before he saw the horse. Someone was approaching the ranch in this terrible weather, which meant they were either lost or desperate or both. Tom walked to the barn door and waited. The man appeared through the rain like a ghost materializing from fog. He was riding a horse that looked almost as tired as he did. The animal was thin and worn, moving with a slowness that suggested great distance had been traveled. The man sat in the saddle like someone who had forgotten how to get off, like the horse had become the only thing holding him up. His clothes were soaked through, and his face was hidden under the shadow of a worn hat that had seen better days. Tom did not move. He had learned in his 63 years that sometimes it was better to let people come to you. The stranger rode slowly toward the barn, and when he finally stopped, he sat there for a long moment without moving. Then, very carefully, he climbed down from the saddle. He moved like his body hurt, like every motion took thinking and effort. He tied his horse to the post outside the barn and turned to look at Tom. The man's face was the kind that told a story without needing words. He was maybe 40 years old, maybe 50. It was hard to tell because something had aged him from the inside out. His eyes were the color of winter sky, and they held a sadness that seemed to go all the way down to his bones. There were deep lines around his mouth, the kind that come from years of not smiling. His hands were scarred and strong, but they shook a little when he moved them. "I'm looking for shelter," the man said. His voice was quiet, rougher than sandpaper. "I saw the ranch from the ridge. I have money to pay." Tom nodded slowly. "Name is Tom. Welcome to the Double Circle. You can stay in a ranch house. There is food inside, and it is warm." The stranger nodded, but did not move. He looked past Tom into the barn, like he could see something beyond the darkness. "What is in there?" he asked. "Horses," Tom said simply. The man stepped forward, and Tom moved to the side to let him pass. The stranger walked into the barn slowly, like he was walking into a place he both wanted to go and was afraid to reach. Tom watched him stop in front of the mare's stall. The mare lifted her head and looked at this new person without fear. Horses know things about people sometimes, things that people do not know about themselves. Then the stranger saw Scout. The tiny colt was lying down in the hay, sleeping as he did most of the time. His small body barely made a shape on the straw. His legs, bent and wrong, were tucked underneath him. To most people, he would have looked like a horse that was almost finished, almost ready to give up. The stranger walked over very slowly. He knelt down beside Scout without asking permission, and he just looked at the Colt for a long time. Tom could not see his face clearly in the shadows, but he could see his hands. His hands were shaking harder now. "How long?" the stranger asked. 3 weeks, Tom said. "Born weak. Everyone said he would die." The man reached out his hand very slowly, and he touched Scout's neck with fingers so gentle that Tom almost could not see him moving. The Colt's eyes opened, and he looked at this strange man without fear. That was strange, because Scout was usually nervous around people. But this man seemed to carry something that animals understood, something that said he knew what it meant to hurt, to struggle, to want to give up. "He is still fighting," the stranger said. It was not a question. "Yes," Tom said. The man stayed there on his knees beside the Colt for what felt like a very long time. Tom could see his shoulders moving like he was breathing deeply, like he was trying to hold something inside that wanted to come out. When the stranger finally stood up, his face was wet, but Tom pretended not to notice. "What is his name?" the man asked. "Scout," Tom said. "That is a good name," the stranger said. He turned to look at Tom, and his eyes had changed somehow. They were still sad, but there was something else there now, a small light, like a candle that had just been lit in a dark room. "I am Samuel Brenner. I would like to stay. I can work. I can help with the horses." Tom studied him for a moment, then nodded. "The work is hard. The pay is not much, and there is not much hope here." "I do not need much," Samuel said quietly. "And I know about work. I know about things that have no hope." That night, Samuel did not go to the ranch house. Instead, he stayed in the barn. Tom gave him blankets and food, and Samuel sat beside Scout in the darkness, just watching the Colt breathe. Tom watched from a distance and understood something he had not understood before, that sometimes the people who understand broken things are the ones who have been broken themselves. The next morning, Samuel was still there. And the morning after that, and the morning after that. Tom never asked questions. He simply brought feed and water. But he noticed that Scout's eyes began to shine a little brighter. He noticed that the Colt seemed to stand a little stronger. He noticed that Samuel talked to Scout in a low voice, telling him stories that Tom could not quite hear, but could feel the power of. The ranch was still dying, the fences were still broken, the world outside was still hard and cold. But in the barn, something was beginning to happen, something that nobody had predicted, something that felt like magic or maybe just like love. The summer came hot and heavy, and with it came a change that Tom could barely believe was real. Scout was no longer tiny. His legs were still not perfectly straight. They would never be perfectly straight, but they were strong now, strong in a way that seemed impossible 3 months ago. His coat had filled in dark and shiny, almost black like storm clouds moving across the desert at sunset. His ribs no longer showed. His eyes had a brightness to them that spoke of life and will and a future he had almost not been given. Samuel had not left the barn once since arriving that rainy April night. Tom had offered him the ranch house many times, offered him a real bed and hot water and a place to sleep away from the animals. Samuel always said no. He slept in a barn on blankets, spread over clean hay. He woke before dawn and worked through the day and sat with Scout every evening. He had become part of the routine as much as Tom had, and the old ranch manager had stopped trying to understand it and simply accepted it as natural as breathing. On a morning in late June, Samuel did something different. He brought a saddle. It was an old saddle, worn and creased from use, the leather dark from years of rain and sun and sweat. Samuel carried it carefully into the barn and set it on the fence rail beside Scout's stall. Tom watched from a distance as Samuel ran his hands over the leather, as if saying goodbye to something precious, or maybe hello to something new. "Today we begin something new," Samuel said to Scout, though Tom was the only other person there to hear. "Today you learn what you are really made of." Scout was almost 4 months old now, but still young, still learning how the world worked. Samuel had been teaching him many things, how to walk longer distances, how to trust, how to be brave when things were difficult. But this was different. This was taking Scout from the safe barn and asking him to carry something, to do something, to become something more than just a survivor. Samuel did not put the saddle on Scout that day, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, he simply let Scout see it, smell it, understand it. He would sit beside the saddle and talk to Scout in that quiet voice of his, telling him things that Tom could not quite hear but understood the meaning of anyway. He was teaching Scout not to be afraid. On the fourth day, Samuel put the saddle on Scout's back. Tom's heart beat faster when he saw it happen. The colt was so small still, and the saddle seemed so heavy, so large against his young body. But Scout did not panic. He did not run or buck or show fear. He simply stood there, breathing carefully, trusting the man who had saved his life. Samuel stood beside him for hours, just holding him, just being there. "Good boy," Samuel whispered. "You are stronger than you know. You are braver than you believe." That week, Samuel began to walk Scout around the corral with the saddle on. Just walking, nothing more. The colt moved carefully at first, learning to balance the weight, learning to trust his own body. But after a few days, Scout began to walk like he understood something, like he understood that the weight on his back did not mean pain, did not mean ending, but instead meant purpose. One evening, Tom saw something that made him understand Samuel a little better. Samuel was sitting alone with Scout in the corral as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and gold. The man was talking to the horse, and even though Tom could not hear the words clearly, he could hear the emotion in them. Samuel was telling Scout about loss, about people he had loved, about a family that had been taken from him by fever and sickness. He was telling Scout about the years he had spent alone, moving from ranch to ranch, town to town, never staying anywhere, because staying meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. "But you," Samuel said to Scout, his voice breaking like thin ice, "you're showing me something I forgot. You're showing me that broken things can become strong, that impossible things can happen, that a life that should have ended can become beautiful instead." Tom felt tears in his own eyes, and he turned away to give the man privacy. He understood now why Samuel had come to the Double Circle Ranch. He understood why Samuel sat in the barn every single night. Samuel was not just healing Scout. Scout was healing Samuel. The transformation was happening both ways. The colt was becoming strong, and the broken man was becoming whole. In the middle of July, Samuel did the thing that Tom had been both waiting for and dreading. He climbed on a Scout's back. It was evening, and the desert was beginning to cool after the hot day. Samuel moved slowly, carefully, putting his weight on the colt with gentleness, like he was afraid Scout might break under him. Scout stood very still, feeling the man settle into the saddle, feeling the responsibility of carrying someone who had carried him. Then, slowly, very slowly, they began to move. Tom watched from the fence as Samuel and Scout walked around the corral together. The man was not a young person anymore, and the colt was still learning, and yet they moved together like they understood something that Tom could not quite grasp. They were no longer separate beings, a man and a horse, but something closer, something more connected than that. They were two broken things that had found each other and were learning to be strong together. Scout did not trip on his bent legs. Scout did not fall. Scout did not fail. Instead, he walked like he had been born to do this very thing. Samuel sat in the saddle like he had finally found a place where he belonged after years and years of wandering in darkness. As the sun dropped below the horizon, Tom saw something impossible happen. Samuel smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible in the fading light, but it was real. The broken man was smiling, and the impossible colt was carrying him forward into the evening, carrying him towards something that looked like hope. Tom went inside the ranch house that night, knowing that the story of this place had changed forever. The Double Circle Ranch was no longer dying. Something was growing here now. Something powerful, something that could not be stopped, something that would eventually become a legend that people would whisper about around campfires for generations to come. But Tom did not know that yet. He only knew that in the barn, a man and a colt were learning to fly, one slow step at a time. The two young ranch hands left in early August. Tom was not surprised. There was no real work for them anymore, and the pay had always been poor. One of them, a boy named Jesse who could not have been more than 19, came to say goodbye. He stood awkwardly in the barn and looked at Scout, and Samuel moving together in the corral. "That horse should have died," Jesse said, not unkindly. He was just stating a fact the way young people do, without understanding how much weight such words carry. "Yes," Tom said, "he should have." "But he did not," Jesse said. He watched Samuel and Scout for another moment, then shook his head like he could not understand what his eyes were showing him. "That man talks to that horse like it is a person, like it is his family or something." Tom said nothing. What was there to say? Some things could not be explained with words. Some things had to be felt. After Jesse left, the ranch was quieter than ever. Just Tom, Samuel, and Scout. The three of them had become a kind of family, though nobody spoke it aloud. They moved through the days in a rhythm that felt natural and right. Tom managing what little work there was to do, Samuel training Scout, both of them caring for the animals and the land. By September, Scout was nearly 6 months old, and he looked like a real horse now. Not a tiny, broken thing, but an actual animal with strength and purpose. Samuel had been riding him longer distances, taking him out into the desert past the boundaries of the ranch, teaching him to navigate the hard land that would be his home. One morning, Samuel came to Tom with a request. "I need to ride far today," Samuel said. His voice was calm, but Tom could see something in his eyes, a need, a hunger, a reason that went deeper than just training a young horse. "I need to go to the next town. It is 2 days' ride. I want to take Scout." Tom studied the man for a long moment. Samuel had never left the ranch since arriving. He had never asked for anything except to stay and work. "What?" Tom asked simply. Samuel looked out toward the desert, toward the endless horizon where sky and earth seemed to touch. "I need to find someone," he said. "I need to tell someone that I'm still alive. I need to tell them that I found a reason to live again." Tom understood. He understood that Samuel was not just riding to a town. Samuel was riding toward his past, toward the life he had left behind, toward people who might have thought him lost forever. "Go," Tom said. "Scout is ready, and so are you." Samuel left at dawn the next morning. Tom watched them disappear into the desert. The man and the horse that should have died, moving together like they were one creature instead of two. Samuel sat tall in the saddle now, not bent and broken the way he had been when he arrived. Scout moved with confidence, his bent legs carrying him forward without hesitation or fear. They crossed into the shimmering heat of the desert and became smaller and smaller until they vanished completely. Tom waited. He did not know if Samuel would come back. Men like Samuel sometimes disappeared into the desert and never returned. Sometimes they found what they were looking for and decided to stay there. Sometimes they got lost, or their horses went lame, or the desert decided they did not belong to it after all. But Tom kept the barn clean. He kept Scout's stall ready. He watered the horses and fed the mare and waited. On the evening of the third day, Tom heard the hoofbeats. They came from the east, out of the heat shimmer and the dust, and they were moving fast. Tom walked to the gate and waited. First he saw the dust cloud, then the shape of a horse moving hard. Then finally he could see them clearly. Samuel was riding Scout at a speed that Tom would not have thought possible. The young horse was running like he had been born to run, like his bent legs had never been bent at all, like he was flying across the desert floor. And behind them, riding another horse, was a woman. She was older, maybe Samuel's age, with gray in her hair and a face that showed she had lived a hard life. But she was smiling, and she was riding like she knew how to ride, and when Samuel pulled Scout up at the gate, she was laughing. "This is the horse," the woman said, her voice carrying wonder. "This is the impossible horse." "This is Scout," Samuel said. His face was transformed, younger somehow, or maybe just more alive. "And this is Elizabeth. She is my sister. I thought she was lost to me forever." Tom's eyes grew wet, and he did not try to hide it. Elizabeth climbed down from her horse and walked right up to Scout. She put her hands on his neck and she cried. "Samuel told me what you saved him from," she said to the horse, though of course Scout could not understand words. "He told me you brought him back from darkness. I have been looking for my brother for 7 years. I thought he was dead, and now I find him here in this desert with a horse that was not supposed to live." "Life is strange," Samuel said quietly. "Life is full of miracles for those who wait long enough to see them." That night, the four of them, Tom, Samuel, Elizabeth, and Scout, sat together as the stars came out. Elizabeth told stories about Samuel before the fever came, before he lost his family and became a wanderer. Samuel told stories about Scout, about the first moment he saw the Colt and knew that something important was beginning. Tom listened and understood that he had been part of something bigger than himself, part of a story that reached back into the past and forward into a future he could not yet see. "How long will you stay?" Tom asked Elizabeth. "As long as Samuel stays," she said, looking at her brother. "I have money saved. I have time. I have lost my brother once. I will not lose him again." Samuel looked at Scout, who was standing nearby, his dark coat gleaming in the starlight. "I think we will stay," he said. "I think this is where we belong now. The desert brought me here. Scout brought me back to life. And now Elizabeth has come home too." Tom smiled, and for the first time in many years, he believed that the Double Circle Ranch might become something important again. Not because of money or business, but because of love, because of people and horses who refused to give up, because of the power of second chances. As the night grew deeper, Tom watched Scout standing peacefully in the corral, and he knew that the legend of the impossible Colt was only beginning. The best part of the story was still ahead. 1 year had passed. The Double Circle Ranch was not a dying place anymore. Elizabeth had used her money to fix the fences and repair the barn and bring life back to the corrals. She had hired new workers, good people who understood that this ranch was different from other ranches, that something sacred lived here. The workers did not ask many questions about the man and the horse. They simply respected them, the way people respect things they do not fully understand but feel are important. Scout was almost 2 years old now, and he was beautiful in a way that took people's breath away. His legs were still not perfectly straight. The bend in them would never completely disappear, but it no longer mattered. Scout had become a horse that could run faster than most horses, that could move across the desert with grace and power that seemed impossible for an animal that should have died before he ever lived. Riders from other ranches would come just to see him, just to watch him move, just to understand how such a thing could be real. But Samuel kept Scout mostly to himself. There were a few times a month when Samuel would ride Scout out into the desert, just the two of them, disappearing for hours into the heat and the space and the endless horizon. Where they went, nobody knew. What they did out there, nobody asked. But when they returned, Samuel's face would be peaceful in a way that Tom had learned meant the man was healing deeper in his soul, in places that sickness and sadness had damaged but could not destroy. Elizabeth had become like a mother to the ranch. She cooked good food. She laughed often. She told stories about the old days when her family was whole. Tom had fallen in love with her slowly and completely, the way old people fall in love when they have stopped believing they would ever feel anything beautiful again. By December, they had decided to marry. "We should have the wedding here," Elizabeth said to Tom as they stood watching Scout in the corral. "We should have it in the spring, when everything is growing again. We should make it something special." Tom looked at Scout, at the impossible horse that had brought everyone together, and he knew that Elizabeth was right. This place had become something beyond a ranch. It had become a place where broken things came to heal. But before spring came, something happened that changed everything. A man arrived from the east in late January, riding a horse that was nearly dead with exhaustion. He was a newspaper writer from a big city, traveling through the territory collecting stories for his publication. He had heard rumors about a ranch, a horse, a miracle. He had come to find the truth. Samuel almost turned him away. But Elizabeth convinced her brother that the story was important, that stories like theirs needed to be told. So the writer stayed for a week, and he listened, and he watched, and he wrote everything down in his small notebook. What he wrote changed everything. The story appeared in newspapers across the territory. The Colt that should have died, a tale of impossible love and Western magic. It was picked up and printed again and again. People began to come to the Double Circle Ranch, not just from nearby towns, but from far away, from places Samuel and Elizabeth had never even heard of. They came to see Scout, to touch him, to understand how such a thing could be real. Samuel did not like the attention at first. He wanted to hide, to retreat into the quiet life he and Scout had built together. But slowly, he began to understand that his story mattered to people. It mattered to broken people who thought their lives were finished. It mattered to hopeless people who had stopped believing in miracles. It mattered to lonely people who had forgotten that love could come in unexpected forms. In the spring, the wedding happened. Tom and Elizabeth married on a day when the desert was blooming with wildflowers, when the sky was the blue of clear water, when the wind carried the smell of growing things. Samuel stood beside Tom as his best man, and Scout stood in the corral nearby, his dark coat shining like polished stone. The workers from the ranch came, and neighboring ranchers came, and even some of the people from the town came to celebrate. After the ceremony, Samuel rode Scout out into the desert alone, like he did every few months. But this time, when he returned, his face was different. He had made a decision. "I'm going to travel," Samuel told Tom and Elizabeth that evening. "I'm going to ride Scout across this territory and tell our story to people who need to hear it. I'm going to let them see what is possible when you refuse to give up." "How long will you be gone?" Elizabeth asked, though she already knew the answer. "Until the story is told," Samuel said. "Until people understand that broken things can become beautiful, that impossible things can happen, that love is stronger than logic." Tom felt sad, but he also felt proud. He understood that Samuel and Scout belonged to something larger than one ranch. They belonged to the world. Samuel left in early summer, and word traveled ahead of him through the territory. Everywhere he went, people came to see the man and the horse that had become a legend. They wrote more stories. They told the tale around campfires. They spoke of Scout's bent legs and how they carried him faster than any horse should be able to run. They spoke of Samuel's transformation from broken man to healed soul. Tom and Elizabeth stayed at the Double Circle Ranch and made it into something beautiful. They had children eventually, and those children grew up knowing Scout's story from the moment they could understand words. They grew up understanding that miracles were real, that broken things could heal, that love could fix what seemed unfixable. Years passed, many years. Tom grew old and died peacefully in his sleep, still believing in the magic he had witnessed. Elizabeth lived longer, long enough to see grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them all about the tiny colt that came to the ranch one spring night, about the broken man who healed him, about how love had saved them both. Samuel and Scout traveled for 10 years, becoming more famous with each passing season. Paintings were made of them. Songs were written about them. Children heard their story in schoolhouses across the West. Eventually, Samuel grew too old to ride, and he settled at a small ranch in the mountains where Scout could run free for the rest of his days. But the legend never died. Even now, more than 100 years later, people still tell the story of Scout and Samuel. They tell it around campfires in the desert. They tell it to children who need to believe in miracles. They tell it to broken people who need to know that second chances are real. Some say that on certain nights, if you ride out into the desert and listen carefully, you can hear the sound of hoofbeats, fast hoofbeats, powerful hoofbeats, the hoofbeats of a horse that refused to die. Some say that if you are very lucky, you might see them, a man and a horse, moving through the starlight like they're still riding toward something important, still searching for broken hearts that need saving, still believing that love is stronger than death. The Double Circle Ranch still stands, though is old now and weathered by time. But people still visit it, still stand in the corral where Scout once learned to be strong, still feel the power of what happened there, the power of refusing to give up, the power of love, the power of impossible things becoming real. And in the barn, in a special place of honor, there is a saddle hanging on the wall. It is old and worn, the leather cracked from sun and time. It is Samuel's saddle, the saddle that carried the man who saved a colt that should have died, the saddle that became part of a legend that will live forever in the hearts of people who believe that broken things can become beautiful, that miracles do happen, and that love, true, deep, unstoppable love, is the most powerful force in the world. The end.